Pakistani hegemony. They raped hundreds of thousands of women. The atrocities are, and I suggest if any of you have the opportunity to visit the Liberation War Museum in Bangladesh, and you will see the evidence of these atrocities. So that's the role they played there. So why are they a threat now if they don't have this electoral power? You really got, I think, to the nut when you talked about their street power. And I'd actually like to make a comparison to something in Pakistan that happened recently. Just before the most recent Pakistani elections, Imran Khan, the head of PTI, who's now Prime Minister, reached out and really tried to bring into the fold a group called Tehreek-e-Laibach Pakistan. And there was clearly this idea that, yes, they were frustrating and they were a problem for the previous government, but I can control them. What happened, though, was not that. What happened was, and Tehreek-e-Laibach also participated in the elections and had very little electoral power.
But Tehreek-e-Laibach is about to be yanked.
Okay. They were able to shut down most of Pakistan, declaring, in protest of the Supreme Court's acquittal of Asia Bibi, a Christian woman who was convicted and sentenced to death for blasphemy charges. TLP, groups like this, like Jamaat-e-Islami, their power comes not from electoral votes. They will use the democratic process however they can to get power. They don't need to become the prime minister. And the last time that Jamaat-e-Islami was able to come to power through an alliance, they had 2 federal ministers.
In
Bangladesh. There was an interesting article about by a journalist who's very critical of the Awami League, in which he said that he's by no means a foe of the BNP or Jamaat-e-Islami, but he said that he had found from high-level, credible sources that when Jamaat-e-Islami had 2 federal ministers, during that period, there was a federal minister who had been operating as a clandestine agent of the ISI, of Pakistan intelligence. Now, Pakistan intelligence has, gets blamed for a lot of things, but I think that this is noteworthy. So they don't have to have electoral powers.
Okay. And the last point, which is that maybe their threat is being exaggerated because there is a power grab,
right,
taking place. So a short answer to that.
A short answer to that is that I think that there are certainly concerns about heavy-handed tactics by the present government. I think that's indisputable. There were similar concerns when the BNP was in power in the early 2000s. This is an unfortunate reality of politics in Bangladesh, and this doesn't mean to excuse it.
Power uses heavy-handed tactics.
That the party in power.
That is a point we all need to address at the end of this.
Yes.
That for democracy in Bangladesh, all political parties need to at least start learning to respect each other and to try and be less heavy-handed in their own conduct while dealing with extremists like the Jamaat.
And absolutely. And when we saw the return to politics of Kamal Hussein, as I was mentioning earlier, there was a lot of cautious optimism that maybe this was going to be a new chapter, that if the BNP could have an alliance, and I've written about this in the past, that if they could return to the founding principles of Bangladesh, and particularly the principle of religious freedom and secularism, that we could have a really robust debate about policies and what Bangladesh's place in the world could be.
Good. I'll pass the mantle to Sam Westrop now to carry on the conversation. Sam, you come to the discussion of Bangladesh not through the knowledge of Bangladesh politics, unlike Seth. You come to it through your efforts at Islamist Watch, Middle East Forum, who has partnered with us for this event today. they have been sort of trying to figure out what is the domestic impact, especially in the United States, of Islamist groups from various parts of the world. So please share with us your perspective on Bangladeshi Islamist extremist groups and their impact at home in the United States, and why we should be concerned about it.
Yes, thank you. Well, of course, it's not just about the impact of Bangladeshi Islamism here in the United States, but the impact of Islamism in the United States in Bangladesh. And I think Jamaat Islami is one of the more interesting Islamist networks in the world today, precisely because of the strength of its diaspora force. Now, our particular focus, my particular focus, is charities, not just terror finance, but the spread of Islamism through charitable infrastructure, through humanitarian work. And when it comes to Bangladesh, this is a particularly interesting question. And I was very interested last year when the Bangladeshi government restricted the activities of two big, prominent charities operating in Bangladesh. One was Islamic Relief, the other one was called Muslim Aid. These are enormous charities. They also happen to be Islamist charities, lawful Islamist charities, soft Islamist charities, some call them, but they are Islamist. One was founded by, Islamic Relief was founded by SM al-Haddad, who is one of the most senior Muslim Brotherhood officials in Egypt, currently languishing in jail alongside his former boss, Mohammed Morsi. Muslim Aid, meanwhile, was set up by Jamaat al-Islami. It was in fact set up, and one of its inaugural trustees was a man named Chowdhury Muinuddin, who is a wanted war criminal in Bangladesh. He was one of the people convicted in absentia for his role in the mass murder of people during the 1971 Liberation War. And Islamists have always used charities to further their goals. This is nothing new. It shouldn't be surprising that we're now seeing Islamists set up charities. It's happened since the beginning. Since the 1930s, the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt set up schools, orphanages. It provides social services, welfare services. It happened in Gaza with Hamas in Pakistan. Lashkar-e-Taiba in Pakistan runs schools. It tries to provide welfare services. In fact, in Mali in 2012, Al-Qaeda started distributing low-cost prescription drugs for people temporarily under its control. And of course, the Islamic State had a very significant welfare service. So when it comes to Bangladesh, we shouldn't be surprised to see charities play an important role, not just in the growth of Jamaat Islami, but also in other forces as well. Charities can provide violent support. In 2005, the Bangladeshi government warned that a number of Western charities, which fundraise and have offices here in the US and in Britain as well, were openly supporting Salafi jihadists in Bangladesh. Charities like Green Crescent, very prominent British charity that fundraised here, it was running schools in Bangladesh that later turned out were stockpiling huge amounts of weapons. ISRA, the Islamic Relief Agency, a Sudanese charity very close to bin Laden, also funding Jamaat al-Mujahideen, Bangladesh. The list goes on. There's a dozen more examples. But more interesting for us are the lawful Islamist charities, groups like Islamic Relief, like Muslim Aid, that are not stockpiling weapons, that are not funding jihad, but are helping spread the ideology of Islamism, helping groups like Jamaat Islami increase their influence. And this really starts, when it comes to Bangladesh and Jamaat, after the 1971 war. Activists, or at least killers from the war, fled Bangladesh, perhaps fearing punishment for their crimes, and moved to the West. One of those was Chowdhury Muinuddin, whom I mentioned earlier. He set up Muslim Aid. The other was a man called Ashraf Zaman Khan, who moved to the US and set up a very prominent front group here, the Islamic Circle of North America, which today is one of the most important community institutions for American Muslims. So two killers from the same killing squad go to two countries on either side of the Atlantic and end up running the most important community organizations in those countries. They went there, these mass murderers went from practicing mass murder to sort of manipulating mass media. It was a switch from violent to non-violent Islamism. And it shows how adaptable Islamists are at this switch, and how they can exploit not just the bomb, but ballot boxes as well. If you take Chowdhury Muinuddin, he didn't just set up Muslim Aid, he set up the Islamic Foundation, a very prominent think tank in northern England. Its directors have included Kashim Ahmed, the vice president of Jamaat Islami in Pakistan, a notorious fan of the Taliban. He set up interfaith groups and various environmental initiatives and youth organizations in London. And the same is true here in the US. And the most interesting organizations from our perspective are the charities that emerged out of the Islamic Circle of North America, which is the main Jamaat proxy, and something that Abba, I think, and fellow speaker will speak more on in a bit. But the charities they established are particularly interesting, and the most prominent, the foreign aid charity, is called Helping Hand for Relief and Development. And it is the overseas arm of the American Jamaat Islami movement. And it is not shy about its affiliations. In Pakistan, it openly works with Lashkar-e-Taiba, openly, despite the fact that Lashkar-e-Taiba's and its front groups, Jamaat al-Dawah and so on, are designated under US law. Helping Hand openly works with them. All the while, it enjoys occasional praise from the State Department and a number of policymakers. Helping Hand openly funds Al-Khidmat Foundation, which is Jamaat al-Islami's charitable arm in Pakistan, but which operates very closely in Bangladesh, building schools. One wonders what they teach at these schools with that kind of support. Helping Hand is run by officials who openly identify as Jamaat al-Islami officials, from opposing the war crimes tribunals in Bangladesh that will work to bring Jamaat al-Islami criminals to justice, to promoting Jamaat Islami political propaganda from both the Bangladeshi and the Pakistani branches. So there is no doubt about this organization's affiliation. It does not try to hide it. I think, as Seth mentioned earlier, not many people have heard of Jamaat Islami, especially when you speak to policymakers or journalists. And this is partly because of a very expert PR operation, but also because people who tend not to be interested in non-violent Islamism. And that's how it exists in the West, as non-violent. Jamaat Islami does not advocate killing people here, does not advocate committing acts of terror or any other form of violence. All it does is provide the theological and political justification for violence elsewhere. And that distinction is enough to have let them escape the attention of policymakers and journalists. So I think that one of the more interesting points is the man who runs Helping Hand for Relief and Development, a man called Mohsin Ansari. And he's a typical Jamaati. He blames the Jews for quite a lot of things. And he openly supports, of course, a lot of the senior Jamaati war criminals who were convicted during the tribunal. He doesn't hide that. He made it clear when the tribunals were happening that ICNA, the Islamic Circle in North America, and Helping Hand for Relief and Development, would be hosting funeral prayers, would be organizing funeral prayers for some of the war criminals involved in the killings. He also spoke about the victimization of Jamaat in Bangladesh and Pakistan. And this is a very common theme. And in the run-up to the election, where in Bangladesh on the 30th, and this is where non-violent Islamism becomes more interesting than violent Islamism, because this is about Islamists exploiting the ballot rather than by frightening through violent means. The current language coming out of American Jamaat Islamic networks is that the BNP, the current Jamaat Islami alliance with the BNP, is an important and noble axis that must be maintained. And in fact, the son of Moita Rahman Nizami, one of the former leader of the Jamaat Islami Bangladesh, who was executed for his role in 1971 killings. His son is very active here in the US, promoting the Jamaat Islami cause. He's an academic in North Carolina. And his whole argument is that his father and the founder of the BNP, Zia Rahman, who were both killed, are both martyrs, are both victims of the wicked secular agenda of the ruling Awami League. And this narrative is not just being put forward by the sons of war criminals, but by the Jamaat Islami network across the US, from the local community groups from San Francisco to Chicago to the Helping Hand, drop off your clothes to give aid abroad in Bangladesh, food bank kind of places all around the country. There is a sophisticated operation narrative being pushed among the South Asian diaspora, to policymakers, to journalists about Bangladesh, that makes use of this network, this Islamist network set up in the 1970s. And it's a frightening thing to see. I think that the other point I would like to make is about policymakers' understanding of Jamaat. And for years, Jamaat has operated, as I mentioned earlier, because it was non-violent. It never came under too much scrutiny. Over the last few years, especially in Europe, this perspective is starting to change, and I think for the better. There isn't the David Cameron, when he was Prime Minister of the UK, gave a couple of very important speeches where he said that no one becomes a terrorist like that. No one, it's not you don't go from peaceful one day to blowing up a bus or a synagogue the next. It happens because of a pattern of radicalization. You come into contact with people who introduce ideas, and those ideas get more violent and more dangerous. And Jamaat-e-Islami, very quickly, especially since the rise of ISIS, has been seen as part of that radicalization process. As I said before, they may not say, go pick up that Kalashnikov, go shoot a school, but they do provide the ultimate justification for it, at least the inkling of an idea that might lead people to think it's a valid option for young Muslims to take. And this has now been realized in European policy circles. It escaped no one's notice in London that the majority of Islamic State recruits came from areas of London under Jamaat-e-Islami control, under the control who they run the schools, the community centres, the healthcare clinics, everything. That's partly, of course, thanks to European state multiculturalism policy, which actively deputises communities